Embarrassing Christmas moment. It's 1978. My wife's in-laws are here for Christmas at our home in Redmond. We're opening up presents, and I get a present, and it says, to John from Mom. So I opened it up. It is a velour shirt. It's gray, and it's really, really ugly. So I said, wow, I wonder if Mom got this at Goodwill. I might wear this to the dump or something like that. So then we opened up the rest of the presents, and we played Monopoly about an hour later. And I killed everybody at Monopoly. I had Boardwalk, I had Park Place, and I just wiped everybody out. And then we were going to do the dishes, and I said, you know, the Monopoly king does not need to help with the dishes. So it completely went to my head. And all of a sudden, my mother-in-law, Jean, started laughing, and just belly laughing. And we thought, why is she laughing so hard? And she said, you need to know, I bought you that sweater. So this is my mother-in-law that I said, you know, maybe I could wear this to the dump or something like that. Yeah. Can you use that in your decision-making? So my mother-in-law did not buy me clothes for Christmas for probably 20 years after that. So I wanted to get on a train and leave town, so on and so forth. So anyway, my most embarrassing Christmas moment. How many have Christmas moments that were embarrassing for you? Oh, come on, raise your hands. Yes, you can. If you take a little card on your table that looks like this, this is a good invitation card to Marketplace Connections, either in Bellevue or in Edmonds. And I pass it out to people and I say, we're about three things. We're about creating good business connections. Secondly, we're about developing friendships and relationships. And thirdly, we're about spiritual connections. We feel that a relationship with God is essential for life and just very, very important. So those are the three things that we do. And I will turn it over to John Taylor, and he will introduce Dave. Do you have a Christmas story?
I'm not going to tell you my Christmas story. It's very embarrassing.
Okay.
We had a great discussion at our table about this question, how do you know you made a good decision? And I was thinking about that this week. I am a new grandfather 2 times. 2 months ago our grandson was born, our first grandson, and then last week our granddaughter was born, and I was holding my granddaughter the other day on Wednesday, and you know, that new grandfather feeling, those of you who may know that feeling of holding your grandchild, and I was thinking, how in the world did I get here? And I realized that if I hadn't met Jean Taylor on a blind date in high school, and if I hadn't made the decision that we needed to get married, we wanted to get married, and I loved her, and then if I lived our life out and had 4 wonderful girls, this little Taylor grandchild wouldn't be here in my lap. So I don't know about you guys. How many of you remember the movie It's a Wonderful Life? You know, okay, everybody sees that movie from time to time. And as John reminded me at our table, it's like that movie. You just never know the decisions that we make in our life, what an impact that it has. I have the extreme privilege of introducing Dave today. Dave's not only my friend, but he also is becoming a coach to me as we continue to dialogue about making good decisions. And he's got quite a bio here. I'm going to read it real quick. Dave Leonardi serves the Leadership Strategic Consulting of Boeing Commercial Airplanes Strategy Integration Group. Woo. In his role, he leads strategic development activities associated with future airplane product lines and production systems. Collaborative business relationships, new business development opportunities, and sustainable strategies. All at Boeing, is that right? Wow. He also has 35 years experience and has served a variety of positions within multiple Boeing organizations, including development, manufacturing, airplane production, product development, and marketing. And along with working at Boeing, Dave has been the adjunct professor teaching classes on sustainable business strategy and new product development at Seattle University and their MBA program, and is currently an invited speaker at Stanford University. Yeah, wow. David. Stanford University Strategic Decision and Risk Management Program. He serves on the conference committee for Inform's Conference on Business Analytics, a member of the Inform's Decision Analyst Society, and a chapter fellow in the Society for Decision Professionals. A graduate of Central Washington, bachelor's degree in business administration, he also has earned a master's in project management from George Washington University. He's attended executive programs at Stanford University School of Engineering and is a graduate of MIT's Sloan School of Management Strategy and Innovation Program. You didn't know I was going to read it. I didn't know I knew such a very important person.
I think the email said take a few things.
Take a few things, he said, out of this. Well, here's really the heart of what I want to share. So David's got a very impressive resume. But more than that, guys, he really cares about people. And he really cares about people making good decisions in their life. Good business and personal decisions. So in Marketplace Connections here, our motto is good connections matter. And good connections matter in the element of really caring for each other and supporting each other, striving for good and personal development. And so would you help me here give David a welcome here. Thanks, Dave.
So first of all, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really jazzed about being able to come and talk to you guys. I don't like podiums, so I kind of walk all over the place. So I've been instructed I need to stand on this side of the graphic. And so for those of you that watch this on video and I happen to walk off, that's the reason. I have to do something when I talk. Okay, so decisions. So how did the question at your table go?
No, it's good. It's good.
How do you know that you've made a good decision?
You couldn't decide.
Very well put. Very well put. But it's a really tough question, right? Because one of the things that happens is that as we're making decisions, the outcomes really overweigh, kind of the process that we use and how do we make the decisions and those types of things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and just to kind of give you a little bit more of a background for who I am and what I do. So I've been doing decision analysis work inside the corporate setting at Boeing. Now, am I okay with everybody in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. Because it sounds really interesting up here. So I've been doing it for about 20 years, and it's really a fascinating job because I get called in and parachuted into these executive teams where people are having a really hard time making decisions. They're either stuck, the team is having problems, or it affects just multiple organizations inside of Boeing, and so you need a trusted advisor to come in and kind of help the teams work their way through a process. And so as we were talking a little bit about, Dave, it'd be really great if you could come in and share a little bit of this, what you do. I started to think about how could I relate that to everybody here today, because, not all of you work inside of a corporation that has hundreds of people on a team, or you have many, many stakeholders associated with making decisions, even though the same set of skills that you use to make decisions for yourself are the same set of skills that I use in making decisions with teams of 100 people. And so the reason I named my presentation today, What Will Your History Be, is because I believe that your history is a summation of all the decisions that you make over time, okay? I also chose it because I'm part of the Decision Education Foundation, and there's a bunch of us who've been doing decision analysis work for the last 20 to 30 to, in some cases, 50 years. And we thought that there should be a nonprofit organization to go out and help kids in K through 12 learn how to make better decisions. And so I've actually go in and volunteer up at King's High School. And a lot of the materials that I'm going to show you today are some of the basic, what I call blocking and tackling set of skills that go with decision making. But then I'm going to extrapolate that out to a larger application where you might be able to take it to your business and, or your significant other, which I have done with my wife, and there's danger there, let me tell you. Okay, so let's see, is this,
Get the arrow.
yep. There we go. Okay, technology, I love it. Okay, so my goal for today, this is what I call my presentation ORS chart. There's a set of objectives I have. There's an agenda by which I'm going to take and try to accomplish that objective. And then there's also some roles and rules that kind of go with what I'm hoping that I can do, and then also what you will do during this presentation. So from an outcome perspective, I'm really interested in increasing decision-making awareness because when I first got into this, one of the things that happened to me the very first week that I went down and learned a lot of these skills is my paradigm was shifted. And so a lot of times we don't really have a good awareness of the decision making, and how to go off and do that. So that's one of my objectives. Second objective is to provide new decision-making skills. Because there are some basic things that we're going to talk about that if you just keep those in mind, it can really help you in your decision-making. So the agenda by which I'm going to do that is we're going to talk about some basic tenets of decision-making. We're going to then talk about declaring and distinguishing decisions, because that's a really important topic to talk about. Especially when you start to think about the level of effort that goes into the decision-making activities. Then we're going to talk about decision-making complexities. These are the things that makes it really hard, and there's some ways you can deal with them. We're going to talk about the Proact decision-making process. This is a great little process that I use with the different high school students that I go in and talk to, because it's kind of a catchy little acronym, but it's got a really strong process behind it for making decisions. I'm going to talk a little bit about defining decision quality. So how do you know if you've made a good decision? There's a way you can actually measure that. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll talk about having dialogues for clarity of action. And so as you start to increase people in your decision-making activity, how do you have a dialogue to make sure that the right things are coming out on the table so that you can be able to have a conversation moving through the decision-making process? Then we're going to talk about maybe some tools for insight, and then there's some traps and some biases that are out there that just kind of give you an awareness of what those look like. Okay, so basic tenets of decision-making. So first of all, by making a decision, you're cutting off the choice to do something else. Now, one of the first questions I ask people is not making a decision making a decision?
Yeah.
Of course, you're choosing not to go in that other direction, right? And so just by not making a decision, you are in fact making a decision. There's always two choices: do something or do nothing, right? So the next tenet is that people have a tendency to make decisions relying upon their brain and their heart, right? They like to think about how they think about the decision they're trying to make, or it just feels right? And you'll have a tendency to take and use one of those tendencies, and you'll take and you'll favor one direction versus another. We have different personality styles. Some people, like myself, like to work through a process, and I'll actually, in some of the bigger decisions that I'm working on, actually write down a few things. My wife and I were making a large life-impacting decision 2 or 3 years ago, and I'd filled out this PowerPoint presentation and those types, just gone in different alternatives. My wife's going, well, this just doesn't feel right. Intuitively, I just don't think this is what we want to do. And so there were two different types of decision making happening. we also, our decision-making capabilities are impeded by our biases, right? And so we have biases and we have different belief systems. And a lot of times when we're looking for information around making decisions, our investigation or the information that we're looking at has a tendency to support the types of viewpoints that we have. But the bottom line is that we should always kind of strive to be able to make quality decisions. And that is a fundamental tenet, because as you start to look at the way some people make decisions, it's very reactionary and they don't necessarily think about what they're doing. And, I would have a tendency to say the slippage of this, I don't think I'll ever wear this shirt, it just kind of happens, right? Instead of necessarily stopping and thinking about, maybe I shouldn't say that, who knows, right? Okay, so declaring a decision. So usually what happens is there's some sort of stimulus, and then there's a response that happens to that, right? And unless you take the opportunity to recognize that you're going to have a response to a stimulus, you'll just respond, right? And so as you start to make a conscious choice around, yep, I need to really kind of sit down and think about this, you actually can declare, we're going to take and we're going to work through this, right? Now, in our personal lives, we probably don't do that very often. When I get in my car and I go home, I don't necessarily stop and think about, okay, I got to figure out what alternatives I have, whatever information I'm going to use, that type of stuff. I just get in there. But as you start to think about, maybe your daughter's going to go out or your son's going to go off to college, and you're starting to think about how are you going to fund that, or how are you going to make that happen. Well, you have to kind of sit down and plan through what is that going to look like. Now, there are different types of decisions that we always wrestle with. And on the bottom, there are the quick moment, in the moment type decisions. We have these rules of thumbs that are based on our value systems. And our value systems take and, they kind of give us a filter for a lot of the information that's coming in. And as we're navigating through these very spontaneous, quick moment type decisions, you just have this value system that keeps you in check. As you move up the pyramid, you start to get into the more significant decisions. These might take a little bit more time to kind of think through, maybe a half an hour, hours or days or something like that. But then you start getting into these big strategic decisions which really set the direction for potentially your life or your business or something like that. And so these are where you really want to spend a little bit more time thinking through what are your different alternatives. So decision-making complexities. This is one of the things that really, in my opinion, when I learned this, it really helped me to start to think about, as I am going into any different situation, I can kind of think about how do I need to deal with these complexities. And so there's three types of complexities, right? There's information, what I call information complexity. So I've got to go make a decision. I need some information. I need to be able to kind of wrestle with some alternatives. Where do I go get that information, right? And so this is what we call the trustworthy inputs and insight. The question, where do you go get data? Maybe you can't go get data. Who knows exactly what it is? Maybe you have a subject matter expert who's giving you a bunch of information. Maybe you've got a marketing report that's come in and giving you a whole bunch of stuff. Well, you don't know what assumptions a lot of times are behind that, and there might be some biases, hidden in there, and you don't really know what those are. When you get into what I call consequences, this is a lot of times, some people will call this the analysis piece of making a decision. But the reason I call it consequences is because this is around being able to kind of forecast what the consequence of an alternative is. And when you start to have you have high uncertainty, you have multiple interdependent variables that are happening, it's really hard for you to kind of put the logic together to kind of figure out what do I want to go do, right? The interpersonal piece, this is what makes it the most challenging. I like to say that I can make a decision pretty easily if it's just with me. I add one more person into the equation, and then the dynamics really start to change, right? And so now you're starting to talk about multiple stakeholders involved, fundamentally different perspectives and frames around things. different conflicting values or different types of biases they might have. So you kind of have to think about all that. And every decision that you have will be somewhere in this box, right? And so you just have to kind of think about that, especially when you start to think about who are all the stakeholders of the people that this impacts. So from a conceptual standpoint, when we make a decision or analyze a decision, the first thing that happens is there's a normative process and this is really kind of how people should logically make decisions. And so this, if you went down to Stanford University and you take the decision analysis classes that are in the management science and engineering curriculum, this is the fundament. This is kind of the tenets, the fundamental mindset around how you start to analyze decisions. And so there'll be some sort of a decision that needs to be made. You'll lay out some alternatives, some information, the values by which you may judge the different alternatives, and then you'll apply some sort of logic to it. And then once you've applied that logic, you'll make a decision. Now, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, one of the things that's fundamental to this here is that you make the decision, but there could be a long lag time until you figure out what the outcome is, right? And so one of the things that the decision analysis discipline talks about is that you really need to make a distinction between a good decision by going through a good process and the outcome, because there are a lot of outcomes that you cannot control. Right? And so the Proact decision-making process that I like to give to the students, I actually volunteer at King's. The Proact decision-making process is really good about being able to come in and PR stands for what problem is it you're trying to work with. The O is what objectives do you have? Because you always have some sort of objectives when you're trying to wrestle with making a decision. You maximize the amount of money that's coming in, or maybe, you're making a decision around dealing with your kids or your wife, and now all of a sudden your objectives are to strengthen your marriage or strengthen your relationship or whatever it might be. Those start to form then the different types of alternatives you start to think about, right? And so you start with the problem, you have the objectives, you start looking at different alternatives, and once you have those alternatives, then you start to understand what are the consequences of each one of those alternatives, and you start to make some trade-offs amongst those alternatives. Can I live with this? Can I not live with that? And then depending on where you're at, you may need to refine it or iterate back through it. But if you're happy with the alternatives you have and where they're taking you and the consequences, then you make the decision and you take action. Now this, if you look at a lot of the stuff and the way we make decisions, I would say there's nothing earth-shattering here. We kind of do this. This is just laying it out a little differently to be able to think about what objectives do you really have when you're wrestling with these problems? And then from there, what alternatives do you have to try to satisfy them? And so this is just a simple little process, and I like the acronym PROACT because you can be proactive in trying to make decisions. And so I encourage you to kind of think about this going forward. So here's something that's pretty simple. It's on a personal basis. But now as you start to move into thinking about decision quality, and I think we were talking a little bit earlier about how do you measure decision quality. Decision quality is basically made up of 6 different elements. First element is the appropriate frame. Are you looking at the right stuff? And there's a series of questions you can ask yourself around, did I just plunge right into this problem? I didn't think about all the different things that are a part of it. And so you can actually ask yourself, are you looking at the right frame of the decision? The next is, do you have clear values and trade-offs? If you don't know what your value mechanisms are, it's really hard for you to be able to make a decision, right? Everything becomes really reactionary. And so it's good to understand what are the values you have and how would you trade those off. As you get into the alternatives, these are creative, doable alternatives. Do you have a bunch of different alternatives that you're thinking about? The next is meaningful, reliable information. This is, do you have information that you can count on? logically correct reasoning? Did you kind of think through this? Did if you need to put a little spreadsheet together, look at cash flows, did you do that? And then finally, once you've made a decision, do you have commitment to action? And this gets into the piece that when you're starting to deal with other people, how well can you implement this decision? So whether a decision is good or bad depends on how we make it, not on the outcome. When focusing on uncertainty, good decisions do not guarantee good outcomes. Remember, we talked about that. To reach a good quality decision, you need to address these, but you don't necessarily. So the bottom line in doing all of these and thinking through this is you need to do enough to be able to make what you think is a good decision, okay? Quality decision. And then finally, they're represented as a link chain, a link in a chain, because it's the good decision is only as good as the strength of the different elements that are associated with each one of the links. And so I actually use this a lot at work because when we're starting to make big decisions, you can ask yourself, did we really investigate it enough? Do we understand what the values and trade-offs are? Do we understand what the risk is? Do we have people on board to implement it? And so it's a great little notional concept around how do you know if you've made a good decision, okay? So focused dialogues. This is, as you start to think about moving into more conversations with other people, there's actually a dialogue decision process that starts to say, starts to set up roles for decision makers and decision teams. And so I was thinking, we were having a conversation at our table about the real estate business. And so you have some people coming in and they're making decisions. You have customers that are coming in and making decisions. And they've got to make some decisions around what do they want to do with their house, potentially. Do they want to sell their house? Do they want to buy a new house or something like that, right? And as a team that's working with them, you can actually help them. Their situation in this particular case is that they want to buy a house or sell something. You start to think about what the situation is, and in this particular case, it can go both ways. Maybe there's a recognition that there's a situation that needs to be addressed. And then from there, you start to think about, do you have different alternatives and information? And the reason there's this snaking that happens through this process is that instead of saying you have this situation and now you have some different, you have a recommendation down here, you actually want to have a dialogue where you have touch points along the way to make sure that people are on board with what's happening. You're then moving from developing the alternatives, looking for information and values, getting into evaluating risk and alternatives, to the point where you make a recommendation. They decide amongst the alternatives, and then in this particular case, you can create a plan for action, put the plan in place, and then go off and actually implement the decision. Now, I know I'm going through this very quickly, but this is all about making sure that you have the right behaviors that are happening and the right conversations that are happening inside of the decision-making process. There's actually a set of tools, and I'm going to move through it fairly quickly because I know we're starting to run out of time. But what we'll do as I start to work with teams, I'll go in and I'll assess the current situation, investigating issues that are happening, develop a list, start to look for different decisions that we're trying to make. Are there different uncertainties we have to deal with? What are the value or the criteria that we're trying to address? This is a concept where you can actually lay out. A lot of times when you get into complicated decisions, there's not just one decision. There's maybe multiple decisions that are all nested inside there. And what you can do is you can have a conversation about which ones are you really focusing on, because then you can articulate it in a tabular format where you can put different choices in there and you can actually have conversations with your decision makers to make sure that they understand the different alternatives that you're taking forward. We'll build what we call a value map, and this actually starts to talk about where does the value from the different alternatives come from, and we'll usually take each one of the different alternatives that we've articulated, and in our particular case, inside the business world, we'll do a lot of modeling around that to understand what the cash flows look like. build an analytical model. We'll get into risk and uncertainty analysis. This really becomes very important when you start thinking about how much risk is associated with a lot of the assumptions going forward in your decision making. And then from there, you'll have different types of insights that come out. And usually you'll have some sort of a hybrid that starts to materialize based on taking maybe a little bit of each one of these different alternatives and putting them together. So, last slide. Different traps and biases to avoid. Starting up on this side, the reasoning, there's a lot of times what will happen is, people, they'll look for information that really confirms status quo. They don't necessarily think outside the box, those types of things. You get into personality traits, the decision styles we talked about earlier. Comfort zones, a lot of times people out in business or different relationships will get set into different comfort zones. Even content selectivity. This is important because a lot of times you'll bring information forward and it just gets discounted sometimes based on some of the different types of people you're working with. Group dynamics, pretty self-explanatory. When you start to get more than 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people together, you start to get different types of different behaviors that start to happen. Motivations, you start to get different types of motivations that affect a lot of the types of information you might get or participation. And then lastly, there's different perceptions that people might have, right? And so, I could probably spend hours talking more about this, which I don't think that you might want to hear. But I would now open it up for maybe a few questions that you might have.
Just a comment, I would like to commend Marlon on making a really good decision. I don't like cookies with raisins in them. Everybody else had raisins in their cookie except Marlon. He had chocolate chips. I love chocolate chip cookies. Out of the goodness of his heart, he gave me half of his chocolate chip cookie. That was a great decision.
But I was part of that decision-making activity, and at first, we were thinking, wow, there's all these great value measures that he's got. He's generous, magnanimous, and then the truth comes out. I didn't want all the calories, John. Right? We'll start up here, Bill.
Dave, do you have time to take one little example of a decision and kind of go through a little streamlined process?
Such as
buying a car.
Buying a car. Okay.
Whatever.
All right. Sure.
Got about 3 minutes, Dave.
Okay. Go back. Let me go back. Okay. Okay. So, buying a car. What's the problem? You got to buy a car. Right? What objectives do you have? How much money do you want to spend? Do you want to have a loan? Do you want it to be a fast car? Is it now Bill's, new, he's retired now and probably needs a sports car, right? Or something. You don't know, right? And so this is now all in your mind, right? Because you want a new car. But your wife has got a little different, we got grandkids coming, that little sports car, 2-door car you got doesn't cut it anymore. So now we need a minivan, right? Okay, so now all of a sudden you got problems, objectives, right? Alternatives, minivan, you'll see Bill's new SUV that's, who knows what, right? Okay, consequences. Okay, so let's think about that. Bill's new SUV, all of a sudden, it's going to cost us, $70,000 worth of little minivan. We could get one off to the side over here, right? But it may not have as good of maintenance costs. Maybe it's got to have a little bit of maintenance done. It's got to have a little work done, maybe a little detailing. It's not brand new, those types of things. So what do you guys think? Well, I want my car. So then you start to iterate, right? Versus then, okay, now let's move into, okay, we can both live with, a truck. I don't know what it is. Right? but you see how, just kind of thinking through it, right? And it started out with you as making your decision. Now all of a sudden it's got your wife involved, or maybe even some of the other folks, right? I don't know, right?
So let's say you've done this in a perfect manner at Boeing in some project. Has there been one that's failed, and then why did it fail?
Ooh, if you turn off the recorder, I'll say yeah. So, in real life, I was on the team that was do we do the Sonic Cruiser or the 787? I was on that team. And so we did a lot of work around, should we go with the new disruptive innovation to the market, or should we do, a better, more cost-effective airplane? A little bit of disruption because of material systems and production systems and those types of things, but great fuel efficiency, right? And so we really weighed out which way should we go, right? And there was a lot. We had strategy tables. We had, all the stuff that you saw on that roadmap. And so then move forward many, many years on the 787, some of the issues when we launched the program that we had identified. In fact, one of the best things, we did a scenario analysis activity where we forecasted different scenarios that may actually happen for the program. And we used those to start to think about, if things happened, how might we try to be able to mitigate those risks, right? And a lot of times when the things that happened on the program materialized, we had a lot of thinking already in place to be able to say, okay, let's go tackle that problem. And so it kind of
Yeah,
helps.
if you got another question, once you check with Dave afterwards, okay? Sorry about that, Dave.
No, I'll be here for a while, and so be happy to answer them. And so thank you so much for hanging with me, and thank you.